everyone, and welcome to yet another really exciting episode. It's just audio, but the quality of the conversation is going to be really insane because Stephen joins us, and I'm sure most of us who follow Liverpool are aware of who he is. Uh, the tactics analyst is everything from his end are top notch. It's a pleasure to have you, Stephen. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
No, thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it.
All right, Stephen. So let's get straight into it. This video is all about the attack or the lack of it this season. Stephen, what do you make of us this campaign? What has gone wrong in the fan third?
It's been a strange season. The weird thing for me is I kind of predicted this season at the start. I'd done another podcast and I was saying on there that Jurgen Klopp's worked really hard to foster this relationship between the fans and the players. He made a big deal out of it whenever the fans left, whenever the team was losing, and he basically said, "Without you, we can't win." And then at West Brom, famously, the like it was about 2 weeks later, Liverpool were in the exact same position, and the fans stayed and got behind the team, and Liverpool got a draw right at the end of the game, and everyone's made a big deal out of the celebrating a draw, but it wasn't that. It was getting the fans to buy into the idea that the relationship between them and our success is paramount to everything we do.
Yeah.
And so whenever we lost the fans this season, I said I think it'll affect Liverpool more than any other team, because we're not beating Manchester City because we've got the best and most expensive squad. We were beating them because of the mentality our team had. If you look at all the statistics in terms of how Liverpool perform when they're behind versus how every other team performs when they're behind, and also how Liverpool win back points from losing positions. I wrote a whole article on it, how we were outperforming every other big team in Europe like 3 times over in terms of the amount of points won back from losing positions. So it was always going to be hard for us to just keep going without having the fans behind us. And I wasn't surprised as soon as we came back after the lockdown, we just looked like a different team. And that was before we'd won the league, before Van Dijk had got injured. This was like back in July. And so I was really worried about that. And I kind of always thought there'd be a drop off. But on top of that, we've also had Van Dijk get injured, and then Gomez, and then Matip, and then your whole midfield moves into defence. And then you can't rotate your midfield because literally all your midfielders are on the pitch at the exact same time.
Right.
And so it was just really hard for us to actually sustain what we had because the whole team was disjointed. And the thing that probably pushed us and gave us that extra 5 or 10% was gone. And I think in top level sport, those things make a huge difference, and that's all we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, even they really do make a huge difference, like you're mentioning. But the fact that we had 3 remarkable campaigns where we reached the Champions League final, where we won the Champions League final, we got about 98 odd points, and we won the league. Sure, the fans were not there, and Liverpool in itself is a very emotional football club. But did we expect such a huge drop? Because Stephen, you're mentioning the fact you expected it, but till December or even till New Year, we were top of the table.
Yeah, but if you look at our underlying metrics were telling you that we had a problem. And also I think these are compounding things. So for example, when I was saying about our whole midfield playing in defence and not being able to rotate our midfield, and then also Jota being injured, so we weren't able to rotate our attack either. You're looking at a compressed season where you're trying to fit like 10 months of football into like 8.5 months. So that's strange anyway. But also we didn't really have a proper preseason. And if you're a coach whose focus is on fitness and how much your team can run until the end of the season, whenever you do preseason, you're looking at conditioning your team for that running so that they're fit throughout the season. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much of us not being able to have our usual conditioning plan, plus also not really having a winter break, whereas we had the previous season. I think all of these things are just like factors that just compound, so that I think everyone makes the mistake whenever they're analyzing things is they want to always find one thing and put their
Right.
finger on it and say it's this. This is what the problem is. But it's not. It's never like that. It's like at the moment there's probably 15 different problems, and all of them have a part on some varying degree. And
Mhm.
if you solve any one or two of them, like getting Fabinho back in the midfield, getting a centre back in January, it's like you're solving one of the issues, but it doesn't really make a difference. It was the same when Thiago came back, and everyone was like, "Thiago's back now; it's going to change." And I was thinking, well, it's probably not, because one thing isn't going to solve all the myriad of problems we had this season. It's just
Exactly.
it's just been a real awful season where literally anything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, and it's also just such a bizarre set of circumstances that will never be repeated again, which kind of put us in a worse position than many other teams for the reason I was explaining earlier.
Exactly. No, but Stephen, I want to ask you this one question. So, Manas spoke about the system and all, and what do you think, how big an issue is the attacking third? Because when we approach this subject, we talk about, okay, Bobby's not been performing up to his usual level, or Mane's been blow hot blow cold kind of a situation. There has also been chatter about signing a proper number 9, a direct sort of player, and we also have Jota. Do you think the system, the attacking, the way in which we attack with the front three, that is an issue? And if yes, how big an issue it really is?
Um, Not to sort of avoid answering a direct question. It's kind of very hard to separate out all of the problems I was just saying
Mm-hmm.
to sort of isolate one thing and say how much of a problem is this. Um, Talking about, I think something we don't really have a way to measure or appreciate really is how important psychology and mentality is in football. And so, if you're a professional sportsman and everything's going wrong in a season, and it must be really hard to maintain your levels. And that's
Right.
kind of what I'm most depressed about with Mohamed Salah this season, is that even though all of this is going wrong, his numbers are still really good.
Yeah.
But I think that's the exception rather than the norm. I think he must have uh, a very strong ability to completely distance himself from everything else that's going wrong, and that's kind
Mhm.
of not normal. And it's sort of given him an advantage this season. But I think Mane and Firmino and pretty much every other player in our team, all of them struggling in terms of the little things in the box, in terms of like getting your
Yeah.
shots on time, hitting the ball in the right place, getting your technique right, and not even that, but just getting in the right positions as well. Like all of these things that you just do almost without thinking, it becomes
Mhm.
like muscle memory. Suddenly you start overthinking it. You're putting like a split second of thinking time into your
Yeah.
actions, and then you lose lots of moments. And so I wonder again how much, if we were to change all of the problems we had this season and take them all away, whether our forward line would just function again as normal. Um, the other factor is as well, of course, they're all getting older, so
Yeah.
they're all edging towards 30. They're all leaving their peak years. So regardless of how good they'll be in the future, I think their peaks are probably behind them, and we probably need to start thinking about freshening it up. And it's always really hard to break up something that's successful, and then you get into those arguments over whether you should sell Salah or Mane, or
Mhm.
it kind of doesn't really matter. Ultimately, we need to get a younger forward in.
Yeah.
So we only have like maybe two older players, and then eventually only one. And that's kind of what we need to do. But it's very hard to take the emotion out of that because they're players that have won us things, and we're attached to them. But
Right.
that's kind of what we need to do.
But Stephen, you were mentioning about psychology. Are you worried personally about Sadio Mane and Bobby Firmino? Because Bobby Firmino, especially last season, his only league goal at Anfield came in the last game of the season. This season, he scored what, 6 or 7? He's not scored in the Champions League. Is it just a mental barrier, or do you think that someone like a Bobby Firmino, probably he's done?
And speaking of Firmino specifically, the whole thing about him not scoring at Anfield, I just, as a statistician, I just put that down to variance. It doesn't. If he had a problem scoring at home at all in his history, then it would be an issue. But it's just random. Uh, and then he ended up scoring at home, and it didn't matter. And people were ignoring goals he had scored at home in other competitions just to make their stat fit. And
Yeah.
you just think, well,
Right.
that's just variance. It doesn't mean anything. But in terms of whether I'm worried about him as a player, uh, in our system, Firmino's not a 9. He's a 10. He's the player that connects the midfield and the attack. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing a lot of people miss with a false 9 is that because the word nine's in there, they always compare him to forwards and goals. And whereas ultimately his job is to connect the midfield and attack. And I start to worry about Firmino whenever our attack isn't creating big chances because it means he's not making the spaces that other people are going to attack, if that makes sense. So that's when I would worry about Firmino, and we don't really have that problem. And as Klopp says himself, whenever he was interviewed, describe Bobby Firmino. The first thing he said is he's a connector. He doesn't
Yeah.
say he's a forward, he's a goal scorer, he's a creator. He says connector. And so it's very important to see how the manager views his role. Because just because we want to weight him in terms of goals, it doesn't mean that's right. It doesn't mean that's how the coach weights him. So
But Stephen,
we're looking
is
at
he connecting
Firmino.
well enough? Is he connecting well enough?
Well, it's something that's really hard to measure in football because the thing is whenever we measure football, we measure the like 3 or 4 minutes in a game where a player has the ball at their feet, and that's what we measure. We're measuring what they do with the ball.
Yeah.
But the problem is that like 86 minutes of the game they don't have the ball, and that's where
Right.
Firmino's at his best. It's the runs, it's the double movements that lose markers that make defenders have to move out of position to pick someone up that someone else has lost, dragging people into midfield, blocking passing lanes out of defense, and all of these things that he does, we don't really measure. Johan Cruyff said, I don't really care about the 3 minutes on the ball. It's all the rest of the minutes off the ball that makes a world-class player. I'm sort of paraphrasing that quite a lot, but that's what he said. And it's important that how we view football and how we measure football in terms of data isn't everything, and it probably isn't even most of it. And so we tend to make this mistake of thinking, I can't measure that, therefore it has no value. But it can measure this, and therefore he's not good. And it doesn't really work like that. Basically, I think how we view football and measure football probably very different to how Jurgen Klopp does. But people can't come to terms with that fact that someone can see things differently than them.
Absolutely. But Stephen, I want to go back to one point that you made about getting younger forwards into the team, and two names come to mind. One is Minamino, who's doing rather well at Southampton, and also Harvey Elliott. Now, talking about Harvey Elliott first, is it too early for us to expect him to come and play in this Liverpool team? Because the expectations at Blackburn are very different compared to the expectations at Liverpool. And also, do you see Minamino becoming more, a bigger part of the team next season?
In terms of Harvey Elliott, I always say this, but we can kind of only judge players based on the level they're at. So you'll often see a young player or a player at a lower level or a player at a team lower in the Premier League, and they stand out because that's the level that they're comfortable at. But you don't know how they'll cope at a higher level until they're tested at it. And you see this a lot with players moving from Eredivisie. It's like Luis Suarez come over to England, maybe took like 12 months to find his scoring form again that he had at Ajax, but he was at a level easily good enough for the Premier League. But other players come over like Kezman and just don't look the same player at all, and he's completely out of his depth, can't really adjust to the fact that the football's a little bit quicker. And that's what it is. Basically, it's the way I compare it for everybody to understand that hasn't maybe played sport at a top level is if you're ever playing a computer game where the levels keep getting faster each time, eventually you hit a point where you can't do it, and you keep trying and you keep trying, but you'll never be able to do it just because the speed that your brain is able to process the information from the game isn't going to cope, and you're never going to cope. And so you just find that barrier where you're like, okay, this is my level, I can't beat it. And that's basically what's happening. So I think Harvey Elliott's a great player from watching him, and the little cameos he had for us at that level, he looked really, really good. And for a 16 or 17-year-old to look that good is really rare. So I'm very encouraged by it. But until he steps in and he becomes a first-team player and he has to deal with like injuries and setbacks and And that's the real hurdle that young players face, and a lot of them don't kind of get over it. Until he faces those hurdles that are a struggle for him, we won't know what he is, but
Yeah.
he looks really promising.
And what about Minamino? Do you,
Yeah,
there has been
Minamino.
interest from Leipzig as from him. I mean, nothing confirmed, but do you think he has a future at Liverpool?
Let me rephrase that question for you, Stephen, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Nidhi. Can Minamino be the connector that we associate Firmino as?
Yeah, it's again a tough one. The problem Minamino has, whereas Elliot is he's older.
Yeah.
He's arriving at like 25, 26, I think. And whereas a young player, it's kind of easier to adapt to things. But I remember Kagawa come over from Dortmund. I'm not making this comparison because they're both Japanese, but it's more just that they're very similar players.
Right.
Kagawa come over from Dortmund to Manchester United, and he never really did the things that he was able to do at Dortmund. And a lot of that's down to the system and how Ferguson used him. But ultimately, he just struggled to deal with the quicker pace in the Premier League. He had moments where he was brilliant, but a lot of the time he just sort of struggled and was a little bit on the periphery of games. And I guess that's the challenge for Minamino, is to basically not fall into the same traps that he did. Watching Minamino, he's another player I really like. I like a lot of the things he does off the ball. He does remind me a lot of Firmino in that sense, actually, as well. But the problem is that sometimes he can get lost in a game very easily, and I kind of worry about that. Firmino, that doesn't seem to happen too much. Firmino he'll drop into midfield and he'll battle for the ball. He'll play like he's a number 8. I've seen him drop into our 6-yard box in open play, which is just, for a forward wearing number 9, that's just insane. To see him in open play, like on the edge of our 6-yard box, it's just. And yeah, Minamino just sort of will drift out of a game, if the game's sort of not going his way, and that's a worry. Whereas Firmino will always find a way to still be doing something that has a value to the team, even if it's not what he's meant to be on the pitch for. I guess the way to word this better is the assistant manager Linder said once that great players solve problems without you seeing it, and I think that's what Firmino does for us. I think at the time he was making the quote about how Wijnaldum and Firmino are very important to our team. I think Firmino is very tactical and very clever because he's played like every position on the pitch on youth levels, and I think whenever the game's going against us, he's thinking how he can solve the problems that we're having, even if they're not his problems to solve. So if they're having like an extra man in midfield, he'll just drop in and mark him and stay on him and make sure that solves that problem, so that our midfield isn't being pulled open to try and deal with the extra man. Whereas Minamino probably isn't thinking in the same way, so he's kind of just like drifting out of a game. We're struggling and he's not actually solving it. And I guess that's where the difference is at the moment.
There's a reason why Liverpool supporters chant, right, the best in the world is Bobby Firmino, because of all those things that you mentioned over here, Stephen. Stephen, 8th May 2021, something happened, all right, this season for the first time. Salah assisted Mane. Right? I know you mentioned about Firmino, right, his first goal at Anfield. These are just stats just to pad up a thing that you have in your mind, but that blew me away. That was the first assist for each other. That is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the other thing I said, though. It's kind of just variance. I think I said it a while back on Twitter, but we as fans just have this weird tendency to put a lot of value into events that happen very rarely. Like in terms of statistical value, so like 5 assists in a season doesn't mean anything. It's just like it's the variance on that is just so high. Like I remember Sadio Mane had a season where he got 1 assist, but in terms of the chances he created, he was expected to get like 7 assists, and then the next season he got 7 assists, and his expected assists value was exactly the same as the previous season. So it's just variance. It's just, it doesn't really mean anything. But looking at the underlying data, like Mane and Salah are still creating chances for each other. And it comes down to finishing, I guess, is if Mane and Salah were better finishing this season compared to the previous seasons, they'd probably have like 5 assists each. But because like Salah missed that early chance against Real Madrid that Mane put him in for, and you can go through the season and probably pick out maybe 10 chances where
That's
you think,
so
wow, we really should have scored there. And so my worry would be if we weren't creating chances. I guess like Klopp always says that the most important thing in football is creating chances. So if they're creating chances for each other, it's the first steps there, and it'll eventually come right. I'd be more worried if they just weren't creating chances for each other, but that's not the case.
Absolutely. And speaking of creating chances, Stephen, just to close this off, I wanted to ask you: are the identity of Liverpool again under Jurgen Klopp has always been, how good we were attacking wise. I mean, we've always been a very attacking side under Jurgen Klopp. So next season, how do we get the same, cutting edge back? Do you see us getting the same cutting edge back? Or as the joke goes on Twitter, do we really need to sign Kylian Mbappe?
Yeah. It depends on a lot of things, I guess. First of all, my worries for next season is, are fans going to be in the stadium? Because I think that has a big impact. I'm also worried about the fact that we have 3 defenders coming back from long-term injuries.
Yeah.
And I think, as we saw with Laporte this season, a centre-back coming back from a long-term injury, they don't immediately get the top level again. And maybe they may never get it. Like we saw with Oxlade-Chamberlain, he just doesn't look the same player anymore. He just doesn't have that same explosiveness that's so crucial. In that sense, I kind of worry about Gomez more than Van Dijk. I think Gomez's explosiveness is very important to his game, but also his injury is an injury that's kind of like an NBA is often a career ender because it limits how much you can jump. And I think Gomez always struggled with aerial duels anyway. So I'm kind of worried about Gomez, I guess, more than Van Dijk. I think Van Dijk plays the game in his head a lot better than pretty much any defender at the moment. And so maybe it won't affect him as much as it does Gomez. But either way, we'll still have the likelihood of one of them getting recurring injuries next season, just like associated muscle injuries from not playing for so long, possibly needing to rotate them a lot more. So I think next season we're going to have a lot of inconsistency, I guess, in defense as well. Okay. We'd probably need to move on Joel Matip simply because if your first 2 choice centre backs are both coming back from long-term injuries, your third choice can't also be coming back from a long injury and be very, very injury prone before that anyway. So we kind of have like lots of problems to solve next season. Before we even think about how we're going to perform. A lot depends on who we sign in the summer as well, I guess. I think we're probably going to sign someone who carries the ball up the pitch because we seem to be missing that sometimes whenever Sadio Mane doesn't do it. And as he is going to do it less. So we're probably looking at someone like Doku or maybe Sancho or someone like that, someone who can carry the ball up the pitch whenever we need them to. And that changes, that'll give us a new dynamic and the system will change to accommodate it. But I also think we're probably looking at changing our midfield too, because again, Milner and Henderson are aging and need to be phased out eventually. And at some point we need to start that process. And if you look at all the midfielders we've targeted, we aren't targeting midfielders like Milner and Henderson. We're targeting midfielders that are very technical, very good on the half turn, very press resistant. So it looks like we're building a midfield to do something else, not to continue on where Milner and Henderson sort of leave off. So I'm guessing there's going to be a change. I don't know what that change will be. It could be like a change in system to 4-2-3-1 or 4-2-2-2. Or it might just be we change how the team plays on the pitch rather than changing the actual shape of the team. Maybe our fullbacks aren't as attacking and our midfield does a lot more in the same way City does. I don't know, but it'll be interesting. I think something has to change. I think we can't just continue on the same way we were going, simply because the players are going to be older. A lot of them don't have the same fitness levels. A lot of the key players are injured. Gini Wijnaldum's leaving, who's important to us. So I think something's going to change. It'll be an interesting season. It might be that this is our season of transition next year, where we sign a few key players, like maybe someone like Owar or Doku, or and we need to bed those in, and we need to give them a season to find their feet. And then next season will just be about getting them ready for the following season, whenever we're ready to challenge again. Which would be unfortunate, because it means next year will just be another inconsistent season.
Right.
Stephen, I mean, that was absolutely remarkable. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time. Really appreciate it. But Stephen, just before we sign off, all right, if you can say just a one word, yes or no.
Sure.
Are we gonna let go of either Salah, Mane, Firmino to get a big name up front? Are we in that position, you think?
Probably. It probably just comes down to finances. Like if I think a lot of the teams in world football that would sign them just don't have money at the moment. Like Real Madrid, Barcelona, they just don't have money. So it's a case of, would Manchester City, Chelsea, or PSG be interested in them? Because they're probably the only teams that have money to spend right now. And then it probably just comes down to that. So maybe if PSG wanted Salah, for example, and they need to let Mbappe go before his contract runs down, and we want Mbappe, that's probably the only way it would come around. But it looks really hard for one of them to leave in the summer. And I don't think signing stars is the way we go about things either. Like maybe Sancho would be a difference, because he's had a hard season. Hasn't had the same numbers as the previous two seasons, and so his stock's lower. Maybe he's someone that we could get cheaper than usual, but I don't know. It looks unlikely, to be honest.
Stephen, really appreciate what you've done for us today. Thank you so much. So everyone, this was it. This was another podcast edition of Menace and the Monk, and we have another surprise. Stephen is going to be joining us once again for something special. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.